His hand closed around mine before the entire ballroom, and the world went silent. Every candle flame seemed to hold its breath. Every whisper died. I felt the heat of his skin, the weight of his claim, the thunderous pulse of my own heart, drowning out reason. They all stared. The nobles who had mocked me, the stepmother who had cursed my existence, the rivals who had prayed for my ruin. And he spoke, his voice cutting through the suffocating air like a blade through silk. She chose me, and I claim her. I didn't know if I had been saved or condemned. I only knew nothing would ever be the same. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. I was born into shame, though I had no choice in the matter. My mother, a servant girl with eyes like storm clouds and a heart too gentle for the cruelty of the world, caught the attention of a lord who took what he wanted and left nothing but whispers and a swelling belly behind. She died when I was 7, her body worn thin by labor and sorrow, and I was left to the mercy of a household that saw me as a stain on their pristine reputation. The manor where I grew up stood on the edge of the city, its grey stone walls draped in ivy that seemed to strangle rather than adorn. Inside those walls, I learned early that my existence was an insult. The lord's legitimate children, 3 daughters with porcelain skin and carefully arranged marriages, barely acknowledged me except to assign tasks or deliver cutting remarks. But it was my stepmother, the lady of the house, who truly perfected the art of making me invisible while ensuring I felt every moment of my insignificance. She never struck me. She didn't need to. Her weapons were far more refined, the cold dismissal in her eyes when I entered a room, the way she would fall silent mid-sentence if I approached, the deliberate mispronunciation of my name, as if even the syllables of my identity were too distasteful to form correctly. She dressed me in her daughter's cast-offs, clothes that had been worn thin and patched so many times they were more thread than fabric. At meals, I ate after everyone else in the kitchen, standing at the counter while the cook watched me with a mixture of pity and discomfort. I slept in a narrow room in the servants' quarters, smaller than a closet, with a single window that looked out onto the stable yard. At night, I would press my face against the cold glass and watch the stars, wondering if my mother could see me from wherever she had gone, wondering if she regretted the choices that had led to my creation. The house breathed around me in the darkness, creaking floorboards, settling beams, the distant murmur of the legitimate family living their legitimate lives in rooms I was forbidden to enter except to clean. By the time I turned 18, I had learned to move through the manor like a ghost. I knew which stairs creaked, which hallways the family frequented, how to make myself scarce when visitors arrived. I had become an expert at disappearing, at being present only when needed and vanishing the moment my usefulness expired. The other servants pitied me but kept their distance, understanding that association with a bastard could taint them by proximity. But there was one person who showed me a different kind of attention. Clara, a young maid only a year older than me, had arrived at the manor 6 months prior. She was small and quiet, with mouse-brown hair and hands that never stopped moving. Unlike the others, she didn't look away when I entered a room. She would leave small things for me, a piece of bread wrapped in cloth, a worn but clean apron, once even a ribbon that she must have saved her wages to buy. We rarely spoke, but in a house full of cruelty and indifference, her small kindnesses felt like oxygen. The turning point came on a rain-soaked evening in late autumn. My stepmother summoned me to her sitting room, a space decorated in shades of cream and gold that seemed to reject my presence the moment I crossed the threshold. She sat in a high-backed chair, her fingers adorned with rings that caught the firelight, her expression as cold and smooth as marble. "You're 18 now," she said without preamble, not bothering to look at me directly. "Old enough to make your own way in the world?" My heart stuttered in my chest. I had known this day would come, but hearing the words spoken aloud made them terrifyingly real. "You've been a burden long enough," she continued, examining her nails with theatrical disinterest. "I've secured you a position as a laundress in the lower city. You'll leave at the end of the week. Consider it a kindness. I could have simply turned you out with nothing." The lower city, where the streets ran with filth and disease, where women disappeared into brothels or worse, where the desperate competed for scraps and survival was never guaranteed. She might as well have thrown me into a pit of wolves and called it charity. I should have bowed my head and accepted it. That's what a good, grateful bastard would have done. But something inside me, some ember of my mother's defiance perhaps, or simply the accumulated rage of 18 years of humiliation, sparked to life. "No," I heard myself say. My stepmother's head snapped up, her eyes wide with genuine shock. "What did you say?" "No," I repeated, my voice steadier now despite the trembling in my legs. "I won't go." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the rain against the windows, the crackle of the fire in the hearth, the rapid drumming of my own pulse in my ears. Then she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound devoid of any real humour. "You won't go?" she repeated, as if I had spoken in a foreign tongue. "You foolish, delusional child. You have no choice. You have no money, no family, no prospects. You are nothing." She was right, of course. I had nothing. Nothing except a small leather pouch hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my tiny room. For 5 years, I had been saving every coin that found its way into my possession. Pennies dropped by careless guests. A few small wages for mending work I had done for merchants in town. Once, even a silver piece I had found in the street and kept secret. It amounted to almost nothing by any reasonable measure, but it was mine. The only thing in the world that truly belonged to me. That night, after the household had settled into sleep, I retrieved the pouch and counted the coins by candlelight. 37 copper pennies and 2 silver shillings. A pittance, but enough perhaps for one desperate gesture. The auction house stood in the merchant quarter, a squat stone building that served multiple purposes depending on the day. On Tuesdays it hosted livestock sales, on Thursdays household goods and furniture, and on Saturdays, the most notorious day, it held the debt auctions. This was where those who could not pay what they owed were brought to work off their debts through indentured servitude, where criminals sentenced to forced labour were sold to the highest bidder, where the desperate and the damned were displayed like livestock for the entertainment and profit of those who could afford to own them. I had never attended an auction before. Ladies, even bastard ones who barely qualified for the title, did not frequent such places. But I had heard stories from the servants, tales of violent men shackled and snarling, of women weeping as they were separated from their children, of nobles treating the whole affair as a twisted form of entertainment, placing bets on who would dare bid on the most dangerous prisoners. The rain had stopped by Saturday morning, leaving the streets slick and gleaming. I wore my least worn dress, a grey thing that had once belonged to one of my stepsisters, and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders that did little to ward off the autumn chill. Clara found me as I was preparing to leave through the servants' entrance. "Where are you going?" she whispered, her eyes darting nervously down the hallway. "To make a choice," I told her, which was both the truth and no explanation at all. She grabbed my hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong. "Be careful, please." I nodded, though I had no idea what I was walking into. No plan beyond a vague and probably foolish notion that I might find some way to take control of my own fate, even if only for a moment. The auction house was more crowded than I had imagined. The large central hall was packed with merchants, minor nobles, labour contractors, and curiosity seekers. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, tobacco smoke, and something else. Something metallic and fearful that I would later recognise as the scent of human desperation. Candles and oil lamps struggled to illuminate the space, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the crowd. I pressed myself against the back wall, trying to make myself small and unnoticeable. The auctioneer, a portly man with a booming voice and a gavel that looked like it had seen years of violent use, stood on a raised platform at the front of the room. Behind him, a series of cells held those who were to be sold. The proceedings began with relatively mundane offerings: a baker who had defaulted on his loans, a widow with 3 children who had fallen behind on her rent, a young man who had been caught stealing from his employer. The bidding was swift and businesslike, the amounts called out with casual indifference to the human lives being traded. Then the auctioneer's voice shifted, taking on a note of theatrical excitement. "And now, gentlemen and ladies, we have something special. A prisoner from the Northern Territories. Captured in the recent conflicts, no family to claim him, no debts to pay, a true acquisition for those with the courage and means to handle him. The cell door at the far end opened, and the crowd stirred with a mixture of interest and unease. He emerged from the darkness like a storm made flesh. Even at a distance, even in chains, even with his clothes torn and his body bearing the clear marks of imprisonment, there was something about him that made the very air in the room feel different. He was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen, with broad shoulders and a bearing that suggested he had never truly bowed to anyone in his life. His hair was dark, falling past his shoulders in tangled waves, and his face, though shadowed and bruised, held a stark, angular beauty that seemed almost cruel in its perfection. But it was his eyes that struck me silent. Even from across the crowded room, I could feel the weight of them, dark as midnight, burning with something that might have been rage or might have been something far more dangerous. He surveyed the crowd with the expression of a predator evaluating prey, and I watched several well-dressed merchants take involuntary steps backward. Bidding starts at 5 silver shillings, the auctioneer announced, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The man in chains stood motionless, his gaze sweeping across the faces before him with contempt so palpable it felt like a physical force. "Come now," the auctioneer cajoled, nervousness creeping into his tone. "A fine specimen. Strong. Healthy. Perfect for labor or... I heard he killed 3 guards during his capture," a voice called from the crowd. "I heard he was some kind of warlord," another added. "Mad, most likely. Look at his eyes." The whispers spread like contagion, and I felt the crowd's mood shifting from curiosity to fear. The auctioneer's hand trembled slightly on his gavel, and... Then, I still cannot fully explain. Why? I heard my own voice cutting through the murmurs. "I'll bid." The effect was instantaneous and total. Every head in the room turned toward me. The conversations died. Even the man on the platform shifted his gaze in my direction, and I felt the full weight of his attention like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, miss," the auctioneer said, squinting to see who had spoken from the back of the room. I stepped forward, my hand clutching the leather pouch so tightly my knuckles had gone white. "I'll bid. 2 silver shillings." Laughter erupted. Not the polite, restrained laughter of civilized society, but harsh, mocking sounds that struck me like fists. I heard someone say, "the bastard girl," heard others questioning my sanity, my audacity, my right to even be present in such a place, "Miss," the auctioneer said, and I could hear the pity in his voice, which was somehow worse than the mockery. "I don't think you understand what you're—" 2 silver shillings, I repeated, forcing my voice to remain steady even as my entire body trembled. "It's all I have." More laughter. A woman in an expensive dress turned to her companion and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "The little gutter rat thinks she can buy herself a pet." The auctioneer looked uncertain, his gaze darting between me and the prisoner and the increasingly entertained crowd. For a long moment I thought he would refuse, would call guards to remove me, would add this humiliation to all the others I had collected like scars. But then, something unexpected happened. The man on the platform spoke. His voice was deep and resonant, cutting through the noise with effortless authority. "Take her bid." The room fell silent again. The auctioneer stared at him. "Confused," I said, the prisoner repeated. His eyes locked on mine across the distance. "Take her bid." I don't know what the auctioneer saw in that gaze, but it must have been something that convinced him not to argue. His hand rose, hesitated, then brought the gavel down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. "Sold," he said weakly, "to the young lady in grey." The crowd erupted in disbelief and derision, but I barely heard it. All I could see was the man, my man now, by some twist of fate or madness, as guards unlocked his chains and led him toward me. Each step he took seemed to carry the weight of something ancient and terrible, and by the time he stood before me, I could barely breathe. He was even more imposing up close. His face was a map of hardship, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, another along his jaw, bruises in various stages of healing across his cheekbone and throat. But beneath the damage, the bone structure was aristocratic. refined in a way that seemed completely at odds with his prisoner's rags. He looked down at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker in those dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity, or something I couldn't name. Then he leaned close, so close I could feel the heat of his breath against my ear, and whispered words that would haunt me for days to come. "You have no idea what you've just done, little fool." My legs nearly gave out, but I forced myself to stand straight, to meet his gaze even though every instinct screamed at me to run. I had made my choice. For better or worse, I had taken control of my fate in the only way I knew how. The guards handed me a document, proof of purchase they called it, as if he were furniture or livestock. My hands shook as I took it, as I counted out my precious coins into the auctioneer's waiting palm, as I watched my entire fortune disappear into his pocket, while the crowd around us buzzed with gossip and speculation. "Can you walk?" I asked him, my voice barely above a whisper. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile or might have been a grimace. "Can you?" I didn't understand what he meant until we began making our way through the crowd toward the exit. People parted before us not out of respect, but out of the same instinct that makes animals flee from predators. I felt their eyes on us, heard their whispers following in our wake. Mad girl, dead by morning. What was she thinking? The walk back to the manor felt eternal. He said nothing, moving beside me with a predator's grace despite his injuries, despite days or weeks in whatever cell had held him. I tried several times to speak, to ask him questions, who he was, where he came from, what crimes had landed him in chains, but each time the words died in my throat under the weight of his silence. When we finally reached the servants' entrance, Clara was waiting. Her eyes went wide with shock and fear when she saw him. "What have you done?" she breathed, echoing his earlier words. "I don't know," I admitted, because it was the only honest answer I had. That night, I gave him my room. It was the only space I could call mine, the only thing I had to offer. I brought him water and bread, watched as he drank and ate with careful, controlled movements that suggested he was used to hunger, used to denying himself comfort, even when it was offered. "Thank you," he said finally, and the words sounded strange coming from him, as if gratitude were a foreign concept. "What's your name?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Calculation, perhaps, or the weighing of options. "Call me whatever you wish," he said. "Names are for people who belong to themselves. I belong to you now, or so the paper says." "That's not—" I started, but he held up a hand. "Go, rest. We'll speak tomorrow." I retreated to Clara's room, where she had made space for me on her narrow bed. As we lay in the darkness, she whispered, "They're going to kill you for this. You know that, right? Your stepmother, the family. They won't tolerate this insult." "I know," I said, and found that I didn't care as much as I should have. For the first time in my life, I had chosen something for myself. Even if it destroyed me, at least it would be my destruction, earned by my own hand rather than assigned to me by birth or circumstance. In the room above us, the man I had bought, the prisoner, the mystery, the storm in human form, sat awake in the darkness, and I wondered what he was thinking, what plans were forming behind those burning eyes. I wondered if I had saved him or if he had saved me, or if, perhaps, we had both simply chosen to fall together. The morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I woke to Clara's gentle shaking, her face pale in the pre-dawn light filtering through the small window. "Your stepmother knows," she whispered urgently. "The whole household is talking about it. She summoned you to the sitting room after breakfast." My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to rise, to wash my face in the basin of cold water, to dress in the same grey dress from yesterday because it was the best I had. When I emerged from Clara's room, I found him standing in the hallway, looking remarkably different from the ragged prisoner of the previous day. Someone I suspected Clara, bless her timid heart, had provided him with clothes. They were simple, a white shirt and dark trousers that had probably belonged to one of the stablemen, but on him they transformed into something almost regal. He had washed, tied back his dark hair, and somehow the bruises on his face seemed less like damage and more like war paint. Testaments to survival rather than defeat. "Good morning," I said, my voice catching slightly. He inclined his head. A gesture that was neither bow nor nod, but something in between. Your reckoning awaits. You heard? These walls are thin. Everyone has heard. He was right. As we made our way through the servants' corridors toward the main house, I felt eyes on us from every direction. The cook paused in her work to stare. The chambermaid dropped a pile of linens. The stable. Boy actually crossed himself as if warding off evil. My stepmother waited in her sitting room, but she was not alone. My 3 stepsisters were arrayed around her like a tribunal, their faces masks of scandal and delight. They had always enjoyed my suffering, but this was better than they could have hoped for. The bastard girl had finally provided them with entertainment worthy of their attention. So, my stepmother said, her voice cold enough to frost glass, the rumors are true. You actually attended that place and purchased him. She wouldn't even look at him, as if his presence contaminated the very air. I did, I said, lifting my chin. With what money? You have nothing. You are nothing. I saved it. Over the years, it was mine to spend. One of my stepsisters, Helena the eldest, laughed shrilly. 5 years of pennies and this is what you buy. You could have purchased decent clothes, respectable lodgings in town, maybe even passage to another city. Instead, you bring this criminal into our home? He's not a criminal, I said, though I had no proof of this, no evidence beyond instinct. Then what is he? My stepmother demanded. What madness possessed you to think this was acceptable? Before I could answer, he spoke. His voice filled the room, deep and commanding in a way that made even my stepmother's eyes widen. I am precisely what she bought. A man in debt to her generosity, such as it was. If my presence offends you, I can leave. But she comes with me. The silence that followed was thunderous. My stepsisters gaped. My stepmother's face turned an interesting shade of crimson. She goes nowhere, she hissed. She's under my authority until... She's 18, he interrupted smoothly. Of legal age to make her own decisions. She made one yesterday. I suggest you respect it. I had never heard anyone speak to my stepmother like this. No one dared. She ruled the household with an iron will, and even my absent father deferred to her in matters of domestic arrangement. But this man, this stranger, looked at her with such calm, absolute indifference to her authority that she actually faltered. "Get out," she said finally, her voice shaking with rage. "Both of you. Out of this house now." "Gladly," he said. "Wait," I started, panic rising in my chest. I had nowhere to go, no plan beyond the desperate gesture that had brought me to this moment. He turned to me, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Trust me. Just for today. Trust me." And somehow, impossibly, I did. We left through the front door, not the servants' entrance, but the grand entrance reserved for family and guests, and I felt the symbolic weight of that choice. Behind us, I heard my stepsister's excited chatter, heard my stepmother's cold commands to pack my few belongings and leave them in the street. Clara appeared as we reached the gates, a small bundle in her arms. "Your things?" she whispered, pressing the bundle into my hands. "Everything you kept under the floorboard. And..." She pressed something else into my palm, small and hard. "My savings." "It's not much, but no," I said firmly, trying to give it back. "Clara, you can't..." "Please," she said, and there were tears in her eyes. "Let me help. You helped me when I first arrived here, when the others were cruel. You showed me kindness. Let me return it." I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat, so I simply hugged her, feeling her small frame tremble against mine. "Be brave," she whispered. "Be safe." Then she was gone, hurrying back inside before anyone could see her transgression. We walked through the streets of the city, and I marveled at how different everything looked from this perspective. For 18 years, I had moved through the world as a shadow, noticed only when inconvenient, dismissed as soon as possible. But with him beside me, people looked. Merchants paused in their work. Women pulled their children closer. Men assessed him with wary eyes, their hands moving instinctively toward weapons they may or may not have carried. "Where are we going?" I finally asked as we left the merchant quarter and entered an area of the city I had never visited before. "To see someone who owes me a favor," he said. "Or several favors depending on how one counts." You said you had no family. No one to claim you. I said nothing of the sort. The auctioneer said that. I simply didn't correct him. We stopped before a building that looked like it had once been a merchant's house, but had since been converted into multiple apartments. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor with the confidence of someone who had been here before, and knocked on a door with a specific rhythm. 3 quick raps, a pause, 2 more. The door opened to reveal a man in his middle years, well-dressed but with the weathered face of someone who had seen more of life than most. His eyes widened when he saw my companion. "You," he breathed. May we come in, Marcus?" The man, Marcus, stepped aside quickly, ushering us into a room that was surprisingly comfortable, filled with books and maps and the subtle smell of expensive tobacco. "I thought you were dead," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "The reports said you were killed in the northern mountains." They said many things," my companion interrupted calmly. Most of them calculated to be believed. I needed time. Space to move without being watched. Prison, it turned out, provided both. "You went to prison on purpose?" I blurted, unable to contain my shock. He glanced at me and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Not exactly, but I didn't fight as hard as I could have to avoid it, let's say." Marcus was staring at me now, curiosity and confusion warring on his features. "And who is this?" "This," my companion said, and I heard something change in his voice, a note of what might have been respect, or perhaps wonder, "is the woman who bought me for 2 silver shillings and changed everything." Over the next hours, in that comfortable room with its books and maps and tobacco smoke, I learned the truth. His name was Kieran, and he was the 3rd son of a northern king, a king who had been deposed by his own brother in a bloody coup 3 years prior. Kieran's older brothers had been killed immediately. Kieran had escaped into the mountains where he had gathered loyal followers and waged a guerrilla campaign against the usurper. But wars require money, and money requires allies, and allies require trust. Kieran had been betrayed by someone close to him, captured and sold into the prison system under a false name. The usurper, his uncle, believed him dead, which was exactly what Kieran needed. "I was biding my time," he explained, sitting in Marcus's worn armchair while I perched on a stool near the fire. "Waiting for the right moment, gathering information. Prison is an excellent place to be forgotten. And then he looked at me, "you bought me. For the price of a decent meal at a tavern." "I didn't know," I said weakly. "No," he agreed. "You couldn't have. But you did it anyway, why?" I struggled to find words for the impulse that had driven me, for the complex tangle of defiance and desperation, and some deeper need I couldn't name. "I wanted to choose something," I said finally. "Just once. I wanted to make a choice that was mine." Kieran studied me with those intense dark eyes, and I felt as if he was seeing past my skin, past my bones, into some deeper truth I didn't fully understand myself. "Well then," he said softly, "you chose a king. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." Marcus arranged for us to stay in a small apartment in the building. 2 rooms, modest but clean, with a view of the city's rooftops. He also provided clothes for both of us, proper clothes that didn't scream fugitive or destitute. For the first time in my life, I wore a dress that had been made for someone my size, that fit properly and wasn't held together with careful mending. The first night in the apartment, I lay awake in the smaller bedroom, listening to Kieran move around in the main room, hearing the scratch of pen on paper, the rustle of maps being unfolded and studied. He was planning something, building something, and I was somehow part of it now, swept up in currents far stronger and more dangerous than I had imagined. Clara visited the next day, bringing more of my meager possessions that she had managed to sneak out of the manor. She also brought news. "Your stepmother is furious," she reported in hushed tones while we sat in my small room. "She's been telling everyone who will listen that you've run off with a criminal, that you've disgraced the family name beyond repair. Some of her friends are calling for you to be formally disowned and banned from all respectable society." "I wasn't part of respectable society to begin with," I pointed out. "No," Clara agreed, "but now they're making it official. There's to be a ball next month, the harvest ball at Lord Thornwell's estate. Everyone who matters will be there. Your stepmother has been bragging that she'll ensure you're publicly humiliated if you dare show your face." Kieran, who had been standing in the doorway listening, spoke up. "Then we'll attend." Both Clara and I turned to stare at him. "Are you insane?" I asked. "They'll destroy me. They'll try," he said, his voice carrying that note of absolute certainty I was beginning to recognize. "Let them try." Over the following weeks, Kieran disappeared during the days, returning each evening with news I only partially understood. He met with Marcus frequently, with other men whose faces I didn't recognize, with messengers who came and went like shadows. He was building something. A network. An alliance. A plan whose full scope he didn't share with me. But the nights were different. After the meetings and the planning, after Marcus left and the messengers departed, Kieran would sit with me in the small main room of our apartment, and we would talk. He told me about his childhood in the northern mountains, about his mother who had been fierce and kind in equal measure, about his brothers and the games they'd played in the castle halls. I told him about my own childhood, about my mother's gentle hands and sad eyes, about growing up in the shadows of a house that wished I didn't exist. I told him about the small rebellions that had kept me sane, the books I'd stolen from the library and read by candlelight, the moments I'd sneaked onto the manor's roof to feel the wind in my hair, the fierce pride I'd nurtured in secret, hidden from those who would have mocked or crushed it. "You're stronger than you know," he said one night, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Stronger than most nobles I've met who've never had to fight for anything." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "I feel terrified most of the time. Fear and strength aren't opposites," he said. "The strongest people I've ever known were afraid. They simply chose to act anyway." As the harvest ball approached, the tension in the city seemed to build. Marcus reported increased activity from the usurper's agents, rumors of instability in the northern territories, whispers of resistance movements gaining strength. And through it all, Kieran remained calm, methodical, working towards something I still couldn't fully see. 3 days before the ball, he presented me with a dress. It was beautiful, deep midnight blue, the color of the sky an hour after sunset, with silver embroidery at the hem and neckline that caught the light like stars. "You can't," I protested. "This must have cost less than you think, and more than worth it," he said. "You'll need armor for the battle ahead. Consider this yours." "It's a ball, not a battle." His smile was sharp and knowing. In my experience, they're often the same thing. The night of the ball arrived with the inevitability of a storm. Clara came to help me dress, her hands surprisingly steady as she laced the gown and pinned my hair into an arrangement that made me look older, more refined, almost like someone who belonged in such places. "You're beautiful," she breathed, and I saw tears in her eyes. "I'm terrified," I corrected. "Those things aren't mutually exclusive," Kieran said from the doorway. He had transformed as well. Marcus had provided him with formal attire, black and silver, elegant without being ostentatious, with a quality that suggested wealth without screaming it. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the aristocratic bones of his face, the sharp lines that bruises and prison dirt had partially obscured. He looked every inch what he was, royalty in exile, a king waiting for his moment. The Thornwell estate blazed with light when we arrived, hundreds of candles in the windows and along the paths. Music drifting from the open doors of the great hall. Carriages lined the drive, and elegantly dressed guests streamed inside, their jewels catching the candlelight, their laughter ringing in the cool evening air. I hesitated at the entrance, my courage wavering. Kieran offered me his arm. "Together," he said simply. We walked in together, and I felt the moment when the room noticed us. It was like a wave of shocked silence rolling outward from where we stood, conversations dying, heads turning, eyes widening. I saw my stepmother across the room, her face going pale and then flushing with rage. I saw my stepsisters clustered near the refreshment table, their mouths forming perfect circles of scandalized delight. I saw a dozen other familiar faces, neighbors, merchants, minor nobles who had witnessed my humiliation at various points throughout my life. And they all saw me. Not as the bastard servant girl in cast-off clothes, but as a woman in a beautiful dress on the arm of a man who carried himself like war personified. The music had stopped. Even the musicians were staring. "Shall we?" Kieran murmured, and before I could respond, he led me onto the dance floor. The musicians, seemingly uncertain what else to do, began playing again. A waltz, elegant and precise. And Kieran danced. He danced like someone who had been trained in royal courts, like someone for whom this was as natural as breathing. And he led me through the steps with such confidence that I followed without thought, without fear, moving in perfect synchronization with him. Around us, other couples slowly joined the dance, but I felt their eyes on us, felt the whispers beginning, the speculation and shock spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. When the music ended, my stepmother was waiting. She approached with her daughters flanking her like soldiers, her face a mask of cold fury. "How dare you?" she hissed, low enough that only those immediately around us could hear. "How dare you show your face here, in civilized company, with the man I chose," I said, and my voice was steadier than I dared hope. "With the man who treats me with more respect than I ever received in your house." Helena laughed, that sharp, cruel sound I remembered from childhood. Respect? From a convicted criminal? From a man sold at auction like cattle? Oh, this is rich. The bastard has found herself a matching stray. How perfectly pathetic. Several nearby guests laughed, and I felt heat rising in my cheeks, felt the old shame trying to claw its way back into my chest. But then Kieran spoke, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet that had fallen around us. "Pathetic," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "An interesting choice from a woman who has never made a difficult choice in her life, who has never risked anything, never sacrificed anything, never stood for anything beyond her own comfort and vanity." Helena's face went red. "How dare you speak to me?" "I dare many things," Kieran said, his tone conversational but his eyes hard as diamonds. "I've dared battles and storms and betrayals that would break you like a twig. But what she did," he gestured to me, "taking what little she had and spending it on a stranger because some instinct told her it was right, that took a courage you'll never understand." "She bought you like a dog." Helena spat. "She chose freedom," he corrected, both mine and hers. "And that choice, that impulse toward liberation rather than safety, is worth more than all the inherited silver and carefully arranged marriages in this room." The crowd around us had grown, drawn by the confrontation like moths to flame. I saw Lord Thornwell himself approaching, his face concerned, clearly uncertain how to handle this unprecedented situation in his ballroom. My stepmother, sensing the moment slipping away from her control, raised her voice for all to hear. "This girl is a bastard and a disgrace. She has no family, no name, no right to be here among decent people. And this man, this criminal she dragged from an auction house, is no better. I demand they be removed immediately." "On what grounds?" a new voice asked. I turned to see Marcus pushing through the crowd, and behind him, my heart nearly stopped. At least a dozen men in the formal livery of the Northern Territories, their uniforms marking them as royal guards. They moved with military precision, forming a loose circle around Kieran and me. "On the grounds," Marcus said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent room, "that you are addressing the woman under the protection of His Majesty, King Kieran III of the Northern Territories. I suggest you choose your next words with great care." The silence that fell was so complete I could hear the candles sputtering in their holders, could hear my own heart hammering in my chest, could hear the rustle of fabric as every person in the room seemed to hold their breath at once. My stepmother had gone from red to white, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Helena looked like she might faint. Even Lord Thornwell seemed frozen, clearly calculating whether this was some elaborate joke or if he was about to witness a diplomatic incident of epic proportions. Kieran squeezed my hand gently, then stepped forward, addressing the crowd with the natural authority of someone born to command. "For those who don't follow Northern politics," he said, his voice calm and clear, "allow me to clarify. 3 years ago, my kingdom was stolen by my uncle in a coup that killed my father and brothers. I've spent these years building alliances, gathering loyal followers, and preparing to reclaim what was stolen. Your king here." He nodded toward the general direction of the capital. has been negotiating with both sides, waiting to see who would prove stronger before committing his support. He paused, letting that sink in. I saw several nobles exchanging worried glances, clearly aware of the political implications. 2 weeks ago, Kieran continued, my uncle made a critical mistake. He executed a group of merchants on false charges, merchants who happened to have close ties to your king's treasury. Your king, faced with choosing between a tyrannical usurper and a legitimate heir with popular support, chose wisely. As of yesterday, I have his official recognition and military backing for my return to the Northern Throne. Marcus stepped forward with a document, unfurling it so the royal seal was visible, the unmistakable mark of our current king's authority. And this woman, Kieran said, turning to me, his eyes softening as they met mine, purchased my freedom when I was at my lowest point. She saw a man in chains and chose compassion over caution, generosity over safety. She asked for nothing in return, expected nothing, and yet gave everything she had. In doing so, she demonstrated the quality I value most in this world, the courage to act according to one's heart, even when the world offers nothing but scorn. He took both my hands in his, and I felt the room's attention like a physical weight, felt every eye boring into us. She is under my protection now, he said, his voice ringing with finality. And when I reclaim my throne, which I will within the month, she will be at my side. Anyone who wishes to insult her, mock her, or question her worth will answer to me personally. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Lord Thornwell, clever man that he was, began to applaud. Slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm, and within moments the entire room had joined in, the sound of clapping hands filling the space like thunder. My stepmother looked ill. Helena had tears of frustrated rage running down her carefully painted face. And I stood frozen, hardly able to process what had just happened, what it meant, what I was supposed to do or say or feel. Kieran leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. Breathe, he whispered. We've won. For tonight, at least, we've won. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Nobles who had never spoken to me suddenly wanted introductions. Ladies who had sneered at my existence now offered compliments on my dress, my poise, my good fortune. Lord Thornwell himself presented us to his wife and daughters, his manner deferential in a way that would have been unthinkable hours before. Through it all, Kieran remained at my side, his hand on my back or arm, a constant presence that grounded me even as the world tilted on its axis. We left near midnight, exhausted but strangely exhilarated. In the carriage Marcus had arranged, I finally allowed myself to collapse against the cushions, my mind reeling. That was, I started, then couldn't find words adequate to describe what had just occurred. Strategic, Kieran supplied. Necessary. And long overdue. You used me, I said, not accusatory but simply stating fact. You needed a dramatic moment and I provided it. No, he said firmly, turning to face me in the dim carriage light. I told the truth. Everything I said in that ballroom was true. You did save me. Not from prison, which I could have escaped when I wished, but from something darker. You reminded me why I was fighting, what I was fighting for. Not just to reclaim a throne, but to create a world where people like you, people with courage and compassion, aren't crushed by those born with silver spoons and hearts of stone. I wanted to believe him. Some part of me did believe him, but another part, the part that had learned never to trust, never to hope too much, whispered warnings. As if reading my thoughts, he reached out and took my hand. I can't promise you a fairy tale, he said quietly. The road ahead is dangerous. There will be battles, both political and possibly real. My uncle won't give up his stolen throne without a fight. And even when I win, if I win, being associated with me will paint a target on your back for the rest of your life. Then why? I asked. Why involve me at all? Why not just let me go, find some quiet life somewhere away from all this? Because, he said, and his eyes held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. I don't want to. Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to fight for your right to exist, to choose, to matter. Because in a world of calculated alliances and strategic marriages, you chose me for no reason except that some instinct told you to. That kind of courage, that kind of heart, That's worth more than all the noble bloodlines in the realm." He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. "So I'm not offering you a fairy tale. I'm offering you a partnership. A chance to stand beside me, not as decoration or political pawn, but as someone I trust, someone I value, someone who has already proven herself braver than most of the warriors I've known." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and surprising, and I didn't try to wipe them away. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Good," he said, and his smile was gentle and fierce all at once. "So am I. We'll be scared together." The remaining weeks passed like a storm. Kieran and Marcus worked tirelessly, coordinating with supporters in the Northern Territories, securing supply lines, negotiating with the King's military advisors. I learned that my dramatic rescue at the ball had been only one move in a much larger game, but it had been an important one, a public declaration that shifted the social and political landscape in ways that made Kieran's claim to the throne more legitimate, more real. But more than the politics, more than the strategies and negotiations, I found myself drawn into something I hadn't expected: genuine partnership. Kieran consulted me on matters of public perception, on how common people might react to various policies, on what messages would resonate with those who had spent their lives dismissed and overlooked. My lifetime of invisibility, it turned out, had given me insights that proved valuable. And slowly, carefully, something else grew between us. It wasn't the dramatic passion of romance novels. There were no stolen kisses or dramatic declarations. Instead, it was built from shared meals and late-night conversations, from moments of laughter over Marcus's terrible jokes, from the comfort of working side by side toward a common goal. It was the intimacy of being seen, truly seen, by another person, and choosing to see them in return. Clara visited often, bringing news from the city and, eventually, her own belongings. "I gave notice," she told me shyly. "I'm going north with you, if that's acceptable." I hugged her so hard she squeaked. More than acceptable, essential. The day came when Kieran had to leave for the north, to rally his supporters and begin the final push to reclaim his throne. He stood in our small apartment dressed for travel, his eyes serious. "Come with me," he said. "I'm not," I started, then stopped. I had been about to say ready, or qualified, or one of a dozen other protests. But looking at him, at this man who had seen me at my lowest and still chose to value me, I realized I was tired of arguing against my own worth. "Yes," I said instead. "I'll come with you." The journey north was hard. We traveled with Marcus and a small group of loyal soldiers, moving quickly through territories that might be friendly or hostile depending on the day. But I saw the northern lands for the first time, the great mountains Kieran had described, the forests thick with pine and possibility, the villages where people recognized him and wept with joy to see their king returned. And I saw him transform, no longer the prisoner or the fugitive or the exile, but a leader surrounded by people who loved him, who had suffered under his uncle's rule and saw in Kieran's return the promise of something better. The final confrontation came not as a battle, but as a negotiation. Kieran's uncle, seeing the writing on the wall, the king's support, the popular uprising, the defection of his own military commanders, agreed to abdicate in exchange for safe passage to a distant monastery. It was anticlimactic in some ways, but Kieran insisted. "Enough blood has been spilled," he told his advisors. "Let history remember that I reclaimed my throne with wisdom rather than simply with swords." The coronation took place in the great cathedral of the northern capital, and I stood in the crowd wearing another beautiful dress Clara had helped me choose, watching as Kieran was crowned King Kieran III, rightful ruler of the Northern Territories. The ceremony was magnificent, ancient words spoken in languages I didn't understand, the weight of the crown placed on his head by the high priest, the cheer of the assembled nobles and commoners alike. Afterward, there was a feast in the palace, and I found myself overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. I was slipping away to a quiet balcony for air when he found me, still wearing his crown, still radiating the authority of his new position. "Running away?" he asked, though his tone was gentle. "Overwhelmed," I admitted. "This is your world, your life, and I'm just the woman who saved me." he interrupted. The woman who chose courage over safety. The woman I want at my side through everything that comes next. He took my hands, and I saw in his eyes something I'd been afraid to name, afraid to hope for. I can offer you many things now, he said. Titles, wealth, security, but those are just trappings. What I want to offer is partnership, true partnership. A voice in decisions, a seat at the table, a place in this kingdom not as decoration but as someone whose perspective matters, whose courage matters, whose heart matters. I don't know how to be what you need, I confessed. You already are, he said simply. You've been it from the moment you spoke up in that auction house. You just need to believe it. He pulled a small box from his pocket, opened it to reveal a ring, simple silver with a small blue stone the color of my dress from the ball. This isn't a marriage proposal, he said, and I felt my heart sink until he continued. Not yet. I want you to be sure. I want you to see what this life truly means, all the complications and dangers and challenges. But I want you to know my intention. I want you to know that if you're ready, this is what I'm offering. Not just a ring, but everything I am and everything I'm building. A partnership, a kingdom, a future. I looked at the ring, at his face, at the vast northern sky spread out above us, and felt something shift inside me. For my entire life, I had been unwanted, unnoticed, a problem to be solved, a burden to be endured. But here, in this moment, I was chosen. Not for my bloodline or my connections or my wealth, but for who I was. Courage and fear and stubbornness all mixed together. Ask me again in a year, I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. Let me prove to myself that I can do this, that I can stand beside you without crumbling. And then ask me again. He smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine and full of something that might have been love or might have been the beginning of it. I'll ask you every day until you're ready, he said, and then I'll ask you again. The months that followed were a whirlwind of learning and growing and discovering what it meant to be part of building something new. I worked with Kieran on policies to help the common people, using my own experience of poverty and dismissal to identify problems others might overlook. I learned statecraft from Marcus, diplomacy from the ministers, and military strategy from the commanders who had fought for Kieran's return. But more than that, I learned to value myself, to see my voice as legitimate, my opinions as valid, my existence as something other than an unfortunate accident of birth. Clara became my closest advisor, her quiet observations often cutting to the heart of matters that others obscured with grand language. And together, slowly, we built something that felt like family. Not the family of blood that had rejected me, but the family of choice, of loyalty, of shared purpose. The year passed more quickly than I could have imagined, and when Kieran asked me again, on the anniversary of the day I had bought him at auction, both of us laughing at the absurdity and rightness of it, I said yes. Our wedding was held in the great cathedral where he had been crowned, but we made sure it was open to all, nobles and commoners alike, invited to witness the union of a king and the bastard girl who had saved him with 2 silver shillings and the courage to choose her own path. As I walked down the aisle, I saw faces I recognized, Lord Thornwell and his family, looking pleased with themselves for having been kind to us at the ball, Marcus wiping tears from his eyes, Clara beaming with joy, even some of the guards who had been present at the auction house, shaking their heads in wonder at how fate had twisted. And I saw my stepmother. She had been invited, not out of kindness, but because Kieran believed in the power of witnessing transformation, of seeing that cruelty and dismissal cannot ultimately triumph over courage and choice. She looked small in her fine clothes, diminished by her own bitterness, and I felt something unexpected. Pity. She had spent her life enforcing arbitrary hierarchies, and in doing so had made herself a prisoner of her own small world. I chose not to be that. I chose to be bigger, braver, kinder. When Kieran and I exchanged vows, I spoke words we had written together, words that reflected our journey. I chose you once with nothing but instinct and courage. I choose you again with full knowledge and clear sight. I choose partnership over submission, growth over comfort, love over fear. In you, I found not a savior but a mirror, someone who saw in me what I was only beginning to see in myself. And in choosing you, I chose myself. The crowd erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. I was too focused on Kieran's face, on the way his eyes shone with unshed tears, on the gentle pressure of his hands holding mine. We ruled together for many years, and they were not easy years. There were challenges from neighboring kingdoms, internal disputes, moments of doubt and fear and uncertainty. But we faced them together, always remembering that moment in the auction house when the world could have gone in any direction, when courage and choice had aligned to create something unexpected and true. And sometimes, late at night when the palace was quiet, we would sit together and remember. We would talk about the girl who had saved her last coins, about the prisoner who had seen something in her that she couldn't yet see in herself, about the choice that had changed everything. "Do you regret it?" I asked him once. Everything that came from that moment. The complications, the battles, the responsibilities. He pulled me close, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "Not for a single second. You gave me back my throne, but more than that, you gave me back my purpose. My belief that the world could be better, that courage and compassion could triumph over cruelty and indifference. You gave me the same," I whispered. "You gave me myself." And in that quiet moment, in the peace we had built together, I understood the true magic of what had happened. Not that I had saved a king, or that he had saved me, but that we had saved each other. That in choosing to be brave, to be kind, to act according to our hearts despite all the reasons not to, we had created something that no amount of birthright or wealth or power could have purchased. We had created a partnership, a kingdom, a love that was built not on fairy tale gestures, but on the daily choice to see each other, value each other, stand beside each other through everything that came. And that was more than enough. It was everything. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll take a moment to like this post, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories of courage, choice, and transformation. Thank you for being here, for listening, for allowing these characters into your life for a little while. Your support means the world and helps us bring more stories like this to life.